welcome. This is Conversations with Shonda, and I'm Shonda from the Minneapolis Foundation. And I'm really excited to have Ron Davis and Wanda Johnson here with me today for a conversation on criminal justice reform and where their lives have taken them in their journeys. So I appreciate you listening, and we're going to jump right in. So I would love it if you would introduce yourself to our audience.
So my name is Wanda Johnson. I'm the mother of Oscar Grant, who was killed January 1st, 2009 at the Fruitvale BART station in Oakland. You may have heard of the movie Fruitvale Station. Well, Oscar was my son. Michael B. Jordan portrayed Oscar in the movie. And never did I expect to receive a phone call that my son had been shot when we had just finished celebrating my birthday, which is December 31st, together. And I had instructed him to take the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, to go to San Francisco to watch the fireworks. And I just couldn't believe that, the one who has been hired to protect and serve was the one who ended up shooting and killing my son.
Yeah, Ron?
So thank you for having me. My name is Ron Davis. Most recently, I served as the director of what they call the COPS office in the United States Department of Justice for President Obama. I served as his executive director of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And before that, I spent close to 30 years law enforcement in the Bay Area, 20 years in the beautiful city of Oakland. And then I was chief for about 9 years in the city of East Palo Alto.
So you two are an unlikely pair, or maybe a likely pair, I don't really know. But often when we think about, if we just go into what happened to your son and in the shooting that happened, the murder that happened there in the BART station, you would think you would walk away from that with hate, anger, attitude towards the police department that maybe wouldn't be able to get over. And then here you are, in policing where there's been really increased protests across the country saying it's time for a change. We're sick and tired of brown and black boys getting shot by police with no accountability. So how did you guys get to know each other, and how, Ms. Wanda, did you get over? I don't even know if you got over it. How are you in relationship with police now, and how are you in relationship with community?
So I'll never get over what happened with my son. But one of the things that it has caused me to do is to begin to look at the system and work to help change the system. And I believe that's one of the reasons why I can sit down with other police officers, because I know that a change needs to take place and it has to start somewhere. And so if you don't know what they say, it won't hurt you. But if you know, you have an opportunity to change. And so with me seeing what happened with my son and seeing him killed unjustly, it put a fight in me to say, hey, something needs to be done. The training that police officers need may be inadequate. And so I'm willing to be a voice to say that training, more training, better training needs to take place.
So interesting, I met Miss Wanda from my wife. So my wife is also law enforcement, and following the tragic murder of Oscar Grant, the department hired a new police chief who brought in some deputy chiefs. And my wife at the time was a police chief at a university, so she got hired to go to BART as part of the new leadership team to help make a difference. So, of watching her and watching them engage and watching do the assessment, I got to see Wanda and her family, their level of activism. At the same time, when I was chief in East Palo Alto, and now since then, is I've been very active in police reform, because I agree with Wanda, the system needs to change. I think the system has to do more than change. We need a new system. I think when people tell me the system is broke, I disagree. I think the system works exactly as it was designed to do. The system was created in the 50s and 60s to enforce Jim Crow laws, to oppress people of color. and trying to tinker around the edges of a system that is designed to have the disparate outcomes is not going to work. So there's been I think a lot of movement in trying to revamp the entire system, to build it from the ground up, and to make sure the system is one that does engage with the community. And this reminds law enforcement that we are to work for the community and are public servants, and the public's not there to serve us. So I think these paths come across because as I start engaging in my work, I see Wanda around the country doing her work. And most recently, we were on a project together where we're looking at prosecutors, the role they play with regards to also involved shootings, and how do we reduce deadly force. So I think the work brings us together. And I think there's a message, especially for a new generation that maybe that wants to work in the criminal justice system, is although the system is flawed, although we acknowledge it has significant disparate outcomes, one way to change is not the only way, is to get inside that system and force the change. And your viewers may tell by my voice, but you can't see. As an African American male, I know what the system looks like inside, but also as a black man, I know what it looks on the outside. And as a father of black children, I have to tell my son, and nowadays even my daughters, I have 3 kids, what to do when stopped by the police. So those 3 truths, as we talked about earlier, those make a difference on how I look at policing, why I'm in policing, and what my role is to help change the system, is to change it from the inside so that it can be changed while people are also advocating and fighting the system and doing the things they need on the outside.
Mm-hmm. How have you managed in your career to hold all of those truths?
I haven't. And the reality is, when I first started, first thing you do with those 3 truths is you try to make them fit. You then try to change them and rewrite history. You try to ignore the hard truths. And I have a phrase, the truth may hurt, but selective ignorance is fatal. And finally, as I just got older and realizing that the only way to reconcile these truths is to accept each one of them for the truth that they are. And they're not going to reconcile. They're going to be sometimes conflicting and sometimes not. Is to remind myself that the truth as a black man, my truth is already written in history. It is written every day for people that look like us. And as a police chief, I have the honor of working with some of the best men and women I've ever served with. So also see some of the sacrifices they make. And I don't believe that there's just this overwhelming amount of racism by the officers. I think it is structural racism that is tearing the country apart. I think because of that, these bad systems, that even good cops can have bad outcomes. And then bad cops get to operate with impunity. So there are racists that wear badges, make no mistake. And anyone who says they're not is naive, and they're lying to you. But I don't embrace the idea of the bad apples theory, the bad apple on a barrel. I think the barrel's rotten, and therefore everything inside of it is compromised. So I've come to realize that to accept my truths, to accept who I am, and that one thing that means a lot to me. When I became a cop, we had a saying, there's a saying that you should teach cops, that we're all blue, you just happen to be black. And so I've embraced a different philosophy, is that I can't happen to be a black man. What I am is a black man that happens to be a cop, which means I was black before I was a cop, I was an African American while I'm a cop, and I'll be a black man to the day that I die. And I can stop being a cop. I actually have since retired. So making sure I have my priorities straight, making sure that I fight for the diversity that we're supposed to have, and making sure that I can push the system to change, I think has allowed me to reconcile those differences.
Ms. Wanda, you came into working around criminal justice reform from a tragic circumstance. And I had an opportunity to talk with Valerie Castile on a couple of occasions, and I've talked to her about not even being able to imagine what it means to grieve so publicly, and to have the images of a child's last moment for the public to see, and that it feels to me like there's an opportunity for the public to take control of a narrative, and for people to try to manage you through grief. And somehow through all of that, you've seen a larger opportunity for change. What moved you to do that, or what did it take? Because there's a lot of different truths that you have to hold in that to be able to push through it.
So what caused me to work to reform is seeing my son laying on the platform. And even before that, when he was telling the officer that he had a 4-year-old daughter, and seeing him laying on the platform and still telling the officer that he had a 4-year-old daughter and asking not to be shot, but yet was shot and killed. Seeing that caused me to have a fight within me to say that something needs to be changed, that I don't want to see another mother have to endure what I have went through. And all that anger that was in me turned into a purpose. And that purpose is to say that there is something wrong with the way we police, and it has to be changed.
So we know that there's been other shootings that have happened since 2009. Do you think that change is possible?
I know that change is possible, and I'll continue to work towards that change occurring and fighting for that change to occur until I'm not here. You know, I always think about Martin Luther King, how in one of his speeches he talked about, you know, his dream of seeing, you know, his children holding hand in hand. And he didn't give up on his dream. He knew that that dream was going to come true. He had to keep that faith. And the same way that I will continue to do is to continue to keep the faith that the officers will soon be trained differently. They will soon be held even accountable for their actions when it comes to shooting males of color. And I'm just not looking for them to be held accountable for their actions. What I'm looking for is more training. What I'm looking for is them to come into the communities and begin to learn and begin to communicate with those who they're policing, get to know the community of people. And if that occurs, I believe that their mindset will change of how they handle some of the encounters that they face.
So Ryan, you talked about the system really was designed for the outcome that it's achieving at this moment. And there's a number of people out there in a growing sort of movement of people that want to get rid of policing. And I know through your work with the Obama administration that 21st century policing was part of the deal. Right. So do you think it's possible to reform?
Absolutely. I agree. Change is definitely possible. I think change is one thing that we can count on in life is everything changes. The question is, do we change it to where we need to be? And I understand the abolitionist theory. The only thing I push back on with that is not the theory, because I think the system does have to be abandoned and a new one created. I think there will always be police now, whether they're police in uniform, whether they're community members who are tapped to help enforce laws in the community or community values. Someone is always going to have to be there to help protect the community. How you select those people, how you train them, how you hold them accountable, how you make sure that they don't get caught. Some of the phrases when you chase, after evil, that you don't become evil yourself. How do you define evil? How do you work within the community? So I think there's changes possible. I think just in my 30 plus years, I've seen significant changes, but I also see there's a lot more to go. And so I would say those who think that this won't make a difference, I would have to disagree. I mean, we still have disparities in our stops. We still have prisons that are disproportionate with regards to young men of color, and now increasingly young women of color. We still have the Oscar Grants and the Philando Castiles and the Stephon Clarks. We still have a lot of changes that have to occur. But we're making progress, and I would just think that the fight has to be continued. And I think we have to see a better side at the end of it so we can get the kind of change. Some of these fights, in my opinion, there's not a goalpost. There's not a finish line. These are struggles and fights that we'll have the rest of our life. For those that are into community activism or civil rights, know that this is a continual fight. The passing of the Civil Rights Act, obviously, or the Voting Rights Act, is not enough. Look where we're at today. The issue of law enforcement, even though we have this progress, we're seeing a new administration that wants to go back to the bad old days and get tough on crime and even going after prosecutors. that are very progressive in saying that we don't want to use incarceration to take a lot of as a way to solve crime. So there's a lot of possibilities, and I think we're making tremendous progress. I just think we just have to stay the course.
When so after Oscar's murder, the community started to protest. Were you in support of that at that time? And how did you interact with the police around that? And how have the tributes to Oscar at the BART station changed over the last 10 years?
So when Oscar first was killed and the community came out and they protested, they acted how they knew that was in how they were trained to act. Okay. I was not against them protesting. I just reminded them to remember that, if you're throwing stuff at stores, that those people didn't have anything to do with it. Who we have to devote our anger to, our frustration to, is to policing. And that's what I've said from day one, and so with the community protesting, I didn't have to go out there and do a lot of the protesting, even though I did go out there sometime. But the community saw and knew that a change needed to take place. And so that's their way. That was the way of getting the attention and saying, hey, what happened was not right. And so now, coming 10 years later, I interact with different police officers in different police stations, really telling and continuing to tell them that we must look at how we are training police officers. Many people are not saying that, hey, tear the system down, we don't need police. Because oftentimes when something occurs, many of us do pick up the phone and call the police. We want them to come. But what we are saying is that look at our system, look how African American are being killed in such a greater rate than any other nationality. And there's something wrong with that picture. And so we have to work to change that thought process of what those officers have been taught concerning African American people. And the only way for myself and others who are fighting against the system is to get involved in the system, not to say that I have to, become a police officer, but to be at a place where my voice can be heard, and as they listen, know that, hey, maybe we do have something wrong with our training. Let's look at it and let's revamp it and let's do it over if we need to.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get to the point of identifying training as a key lever for change?
So when I looked at what happened with my son and the officer who killed my son, during that time, his wife was having a baby. She was actually, I think she delivered right during that time as well. They actually were on 12-hour shifts during that time. He hadn't been with the police force very long. When I looked at all that was around what happened with my son, one of the things that I identified with the officer is that his training was not he was not properly trained. Okay, and I don't want to use that as an excuse because he killed my son. Okay, and so he was not properly trained, because had he been properly trained, he would have seen, well, there's really nothing going on this platform, and so, hey, let me find out what's going on, and then released all the young men and let them go. But there was a escalating by the officers versus the youth there. Yes, it may have been New Year's. It may have been noisy. It may have been thousands of passengers. But the outcome should have been to make sure that those people made it home safely. Okay, that didn't happen. If you watch the videos, you can see how instead of the officers de-escalating, the situation, they escalated. And so for me, that told me that more training was needed in that area. And so that's why you hear me talking about training. In some of the other views that I have watched when young men of color have been killed, if you look at it, you'll see the training that they have been taught. Many of them have been taught that, African Americans, their men are aggressive, even when you look at when we made Fruitvale Station, showing the pet bull. It was not just a dog. That was not it was for you to see how African American are portrayed as that kind of animal to police officers. And so because of that, it made me really say, look, we got to work to try to change this. We got to make sure these officers are getting the training they need, and also that their mindset is being changed to know that, hey, that person is human just like I am. If they bleed, we bleed the same color. And so that is what's causing me to really want to see the training changed in the police settings.
I believe it's on the Oscar Grant Foundation website that you actually have the actual footage of the shooting on the BART station that day. Why do you have that on there?
Because one of the things is I don't want people to forget, because we sometimes too soon forget. We continue to go on with our lives, and we forget about getting out there protesting. We forget about, hey, there's a system that needs to be changed. The training needs to be updated. We forget about that, and we continue to go on with our lives. I don't want that to be forgotten. I want us as a community of people to always remember that we cannot just stay where we are, but we have to continue to evolve. We could have to continue to grow. We have to continue to move. And so in having that there, you won't be able to forget what happened with Oscar, but you'll also be able to see, hey, there's some community events going on that same webpage that's putting officers there in those places that we're having these events. And we want you to know that it's going to take some community relations to help train these officers in their job. Because I believe that when officers come around in the communities, that also helps train them to look at people differently. And if we have more of that involvement, that'll help with the middle part of some of the things that they may have been told negative toward people of color. It may help their thought process when they're dealing with an encounter.
Mm-hmm. Ron, what does it look like to allow community voice in to reforming policing?
Well, I think it can't reform without it. And I'm gonna go a little bit. I think Wanda's 100% about training, but it would go. You look at the system from the beginning to the end, and so that would have to go to our recruitment. Who are we hiring? What kind of experiences do people bring into the job? Are they culturally competent? If you have not worked around diversity, then it's probably not a smart idea that the first engagement with communities of color is while you're wearing a badge and a gun and you're enforcing the laws. So we have to then take a look at recruitment. We have to look at the hiring. And we got to look at it also the training, but also the policies and the direction. In many cases, some of the negative outcomes are based on policies that tell officers what to do versus allowing officers to use their discretion. And that's what I meant by good systems can have, or bad systems can have good officers with bad outcomes. In New York, for example, it was stop and frisk was the direction of the then mayor and of the police commissioner. So that means 30,000 cops are now following their orders to stop, question, and frisk. So change the policy, change the direction. I think the only way that works is the community has to be involved at each level. When I was in the administration, the Obama administration, we defined community policing is when the community and police are co-producers of public safety. So it's not for me as a former police chief to tell you what I'm going to do to make you safe. It's for us to be co-producers. I work for you. You set the priorities. You should have something to say about my hiring process. In fact, you should be sitting on a few panels to make sure we're hiring the right people. You should be training in the academy. You should help me understand the varying parts of the community and all the cultural competency. You can say black communities, but it doesn't mean even with those communities, it's not monolithic. And so we have a lot of different cultures and communities, even within communities of color. Do I understand them? Do I have access to them? Am I walking into community understanding my role, or am I scared from the moment? Am I being trained to the point that everything that walks around me can kill me at any moment? Therefore, my hands on my gun. And if I see a brother bigger than 6 foot, then he's got to be a threat to me. Is that driving me? Or do I see myself having to come into community? And the only way to do that is through community engagement, community oversight, community participation. So I think the reason why part of the system is flawed now is it doesn't really have community. Community is a recipient of someone else's system. And I think this is an opportunity for the community to step up and actually shape and form it. And here's the interesting thing about it is most cops will probably do better and feel better and, quite frankly, be safer the stronger they have a relationship with the community. This is not something that's counter to law enforcement. Been a cop for 30 years. I was a street cop in Oakland. And having a community around you that understands your job, you understand your job, that you have some level of mutual respect is a very good thing to have. That's to your benefit. Trying to walk in an occupied neighborhood that you know nothing about means that you're basically stressed and nervous and afraid all day long. And now reaching for a wallet looks different. Asking you why you stopped me feels different. You want to be able to recognize that why this 17-year-old is asking you why you stopped me is the same reason why my 17-year-old daughter is asking me why. Because she wants to know, right? Now, I grew up saying that because I told you so, but it doesn't fly with this generation. And cops need to know that. Grown folk have a right, and individuals in a free society have the right to question. And so I think the community has a significant role to play. And it's from an activist point of view, it's an advocacy point of view, it's a policy point of view, it's an oversight point of view. And I think we need to take more control. But part of this has to be is making sure the community has reasonable expectation. And I think the question that we have not answered yet as a country, as communities, is what is the role of police in our democratic society? Why are we using policing to solve problems that cops are not trained to solve? Right? In other words, we have mental health issues and challenges. We have issues of social and economic inequalities that contribute to crime. Why are we turning to police to solve those things when the amount of money it takes to send police there could be used to actually address some of the core issues that do contribute to our community and some of the crime rates we're dealing with? Why not put some of that money into providing jobs and improving the school systems and making sure young people, especially young, boys and girls of color, have an equal opportunity? So, all that is to say, I think there's a significant role that community should and must play if we're going to reform policing.
And as a former police chief, what have you reflected on that you feel like you did well, and what have you reflected on that you wish you would have done better?
So I'm gonna start with the latter. Probably I wish I would have done better is when I was a street cop. It was right at the beginning of the crack epidemic, and so you're talking about I became a cop in '85, and you're talking about from the '85 to the '90s. We were fighting this war on drugs, and literally we were fighting. And the phrase has meaning. We were fighting a war on drugs. So being a part of that, I was convinced, and in fact, there's a lot of communities of color were convinced that the way to fight that war was just taking what we thought drug user, drug dealer, everything associated with that epidemic, they used the criminal justice system to respond. What we've learned since then is that has been devastating to the community. And it didn't work. Two, it basically put trajectories on young men of color to where they can never succeed. And so that part of being a part of that and not realizing or projecting what would have been the negative outcomes, when I look back in hindsight, I wish I would have been a little more aware of what collateral damage was going to cause. I think once I learned and started realizing, as you mentioned, balancing my truths, then what I'm most proud of as a police chief is basically fighting against the system and doing things that were non-traditional. My department was the first in the state to do a reentry program funded by the Department of Corrections. We basically made sure that we engaged in kind of programs that try to build community relationships and reduce arrest, that we pushed back against the traditional idea that you will arrest your way out of crime, and to keep pushing and changing views of my colleagues about the most effective ways to fight crime. My community in East Palo Alto was 90% of color. At one point, it was deemed the murder capital of the United States. And we were able to work together, and through reentry programs, through programs that were more about building community, reduce homicides by 60% without taking everything that moved to jail, without having a bunch of uses of force or shootings. Wasn't perfect by any stretch, but those are the moments I think I'm more proud of, to know that it can be done. And then as I share that with my colleagues, chiefs all over the country, for them to replicate some of those practices. And then obviously serving the Obama administration was an extremely proud moment in being able to take, I was in charge of a grant program, something similar to a foundation, where we would put out $200 million a year and on average maintain about $1.2-1.3 billion in grants to law enforcement around the country, and to use that $1 billion and shape where law enforcement is heading, to put the kind of programs together that if law enforcement wanted those hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars, that they were going to engage in building trust and legitimacy, that they were going to embrace the idea of procedural justice, that we were going to basically reduce police deadly encounters and engage in community policing and bring community voice to the table. And to be able to put that money out there and help shape that discussion, I think was very rewarding.
Ms. Wanda, there's a lot of grief and trauma that's happened in community, and we've seen that play out in so many ways, whether or not it's Black Lives Matters, other folks that are protesting, our young men that are acting out with their weapons. We've seen it in schools and all kinds of places, and it feels like, at least from online, what I've discovered about you is that you have also centered yourself in the middle of talking about that grief, whether or not it's from other grieving parents or a community, and being a voice of wisdom, maybe in the midst of dark times. Has that been a key role that you've played, and how does that nurture you?
So, just to start out with the young men that you have spoke of, when my son was killed and he was on the platform and his friends were there, they went through a very traumatic time. I watched them drink more. I watched them go through not really being able to focus to hold down a job. And one of the things that I learned from that is that what they saw could never be taken away from them. They had nightmares from that. And so from that, we decided that we would work with different psychologists and different doctors who have expertise in dealing with PTSD. We often talk about PTSD coming from the standpoint of people coming from the military and facing it. But what I have found to be true is that many of our young people that walk around have and are suffering from PTSD more than we know. They have witnessed so many different things that some of us couldn't even imagine. And so the young men that was on the platform when my son was killed, they witnessed him begging for his life and still being killed. And that picture played a role in their lives. And so from that, it caused us in the foundation to really begin to host different meetings and different events with our youth to kind of talk about PTSD. Even this year, one of our focuses is to really do some more seminars with PTSD, and have people come together and really talk about what we can do and what doctors from their perspective say that we could do to help heal our community. Because whether we realize it or not, a lot of our African American young men do face and have seen things that as parents we may not even have never encountered or thought they've seen. And sometimes they don't share it, right? And so what we have to do and what we try to do is provide a safe place for them to be able to share, for them to know that even though you may have been taught that men don't cry, it's okay to cry, okay? It's okay for us to hug you and let you know that, you are loved no matter what. And so we've, hosted several events like that, and we continue, to share with that. And what I do also for the parents, and actually September 21st, we're hosting a luncheon. It is the 25th of September. It is a remembrance day for those who have been murdered, right? And so we've invited parents to come and families to come out to our luncheon to talk and to encourage them to, don't give up, to keep on fighting, keep on pursuing justice. And so each year, the foundation, we have a lot of different things going on in the foundation. And we're just trying to work with our community to bring forth the healing, to let them know that, we support them, that only through us coming together and through love can we change the environment of our community for our young men, for our young women, because it's a trickle down effect. You think about it, many of our young men are suffering with PTSD. Many of our young men have been into the prison system. So what happens for the young women is that there's no man for them to grow up to marry. And so, we're really working that, hey, you guys are tomorrow. So we have to invest in our youth today.
You shared a few things about the work of the foundation. Are there any other things that you haven't shared that the foundation is working on?
So we just actually finished our AAU and scholarship drive. We have 3 basketball teams. We had a young ladies team, but we don't have one this year. We only have 3 male teams this year. And so we're able to go to different states and go into the basketball tournaments with the AAU division. And so we do that because we know that it's important for us to invest in our youth. Okay, number one. We know it's important to try to get them off the streets. On Tuesdays, we offer a tutoring program for them. They could come from 6 to 7. Hey, you may not want your friend to know you're being tutored. So we say, come on to our place and, we'll tutor you and help you. It's okay to get A's in school. And once you graduate, we don't want you to just say, hey, I don't have enough money for college. So we offer yearly scholarships. And so we was able to host our AAU awards ceremony banquet along with our scholarship awards banquet 2 weeks ago. And we had a really good turnout. We had 8 scholarship recipients, and they will be going to different colleges throughout the United States. And we're proud of them. We always encourage them, once you graduate, don't forget, come back, and encourage, the others. So we had a recipient come back, and he introduced and he shared the new scholarship recipients with the audience. And so it was really, good for, the community to see it, because we want the community to invest in our youth, as well, because they're going to be our tomorrow.
If our listeners wanted to find out more about the foundation or how to maybe contribute to it, where would they go?
They will go to the Oscar Grant Foundation, www.oscargrant.org. We would love for you to look on. We just finished last weekend giving out 500 backpacks to our students with the school supplies in it. And even this weekend we'll be doing the same thing, giving out backpacks so that they can go to school and not have to worry about where they're going to put their homework. And we want to be able to provide that for them.
That's fantastic. I have just a couple more questions. One is, really whoever wants to jump in first, but where is the opportunity right now with moving the police department or policing forward towards a department that is in better relationship with community? Where is the opportunity?
I'll start. I would ask for communities to make sure they're getting as much information as possible to raise the expectations of the police department. There's a publication that just came out. I was proud to work with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. It's an umbrella organization that represents some over 200 civil rights and human rights organizations. It's called A New Era of Public Safety. And there it's like a guide it's a toolkit and a publication that walks community members on what to look for certain categories of policing, use of force, implicit bias, policies. Because I believe the greatest form of oversight is an informed community. So where there's good movement right now is for communities to embrace that knowledge and to then ask its police department, are you engaging in these practices? Do you have a policy that covers this? I think there's other areas in criminal justice reform that we can embrace right now. There's the cash bail reform. There's the First Step Act to make sure that it's not the Last Step Act. There's the issue of reentry. So there's a lot of areas that we can have some immediate effect in doing that. And with the area of force, I think you'll see state by state, Minnesota being one of them as well, is working to try to engage on how do you reduce police deadly encounters? How do you hold officers accountable for using the right level of force? Like you said, and so I think there's a lot of things that are moving right now that people can jump on board with.
So I jumped on board. I'll give you a moment, Ms. Wanda, in a second. But since you brought up the working group around police deadly force encounters, there's a working group. The meeting is coming up here, and it's something that I've wrestled with for a long time. Where you're from community, and I see myself as a change agent from inside, and respect the change agents from outside. But there are times where you feel like, man, you might have your community looking at you like you're trading, you're a traitor, and then you're inside, you wonder if you're complicit. I'm assuming from your career that you've been the change agent from inside. Have you ever experienced that? Can you give me me and others that are experiencing this emotion?
No, I think it's common, and I've felt that for a long time. You feel that pressure, and I think back how we got here. I think about Wanda mentioned Dr. King. I think about the civil rights icons and leaders throughout. That I truly believe that they fought for diversity. We communities are demanding diversity. If we want this diversity, we then can't get mad when we get it. What we can do is hold people that look like us accountable for being there to actually enact the kind of change that has to be done. So it's one thing to go inside of a system to try to make it work and to change it and to make it serve your community better. It's another thing to go in a system and just be indoctrined and just become a part of the system, knowing that it has these negative outcomes to your communities. And people should be mad at that. So as a Black police chief, you should hold me accountable for being a police chief that is in fact Black. You should hold me accountable for understanding the communities and the history of my community. You should hold me accountable for doing those kind of things that don't make sure I keep my job, but make sure that I do my job and make it better for my community. But I refuse to accept that it's a negative to go into the system. We need more Black police officers and officers of color. We definitely need more women in policing. There's a lot of research about how women make policing better. We need more diversity in our government. We need more diversity as prosecutors, judges, attorneys. So I hope this doesn't discourage anyone from getting involved in the system. And when you're figuring out what your role is to be and how you want to push back, it may be through the front line of demonstrating. We need young brothers and sisters to do that. But it also may be going in the system and making a kind of change. It could be both. We have people that have managed both very well. It could be Wanda just laid out a whole bunch of things through a foundation that works with directly on the services, works with law enforcement, works with government. I don't think we need to apologize for wanting to serve something larger than ourselves. I think what we can be criticized for is how we serve and whether we actually live up to that expectation.
Very helpful, thank you. To go back to the question around what is the opportunity you see now, what opportunities do you see now?
I see that there is a lot of opportunity to get involved. Oftentimes, we wait until something happens before we get involved. And so I'm encouraging people to don't wait till something happens, but you can get involved now. You can start by going to your city council meetings to find out what's going on in your communities and and in those meetings, they talk about different police reforms and different things that goes on in the police department. And when you see that, hey, something is going on that no, I think needs to be a change. Well, start right there, work to get it changed. And so I think that it's going to take all of us to work in some kind of area to expect change to take place. we're going to have to work in those different areas. And so in just thinking about how what happened with Oscar, and how so many people now that I see have just are working to see change. Even mothers who I know personally had different things happen to their son have ran for office.
Lucy Macbeth.
Yeah. My friend, she, Sabrina Fulton, she's running for council. Leslie Heed, she ran for council. So there's things that we see from the community standpoint, and believe that if we get involved in those things, change will take place. As mothers, and women, we're strong. And so if we, really want to see an impact of change, it's going to require, us to, get in it, get involved, and speak up about it, and to ask questions and to give solutions, and know that it may not happen overnight, but I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to keep yelling. I'm going to keep that trumpet going until something happens. And so we have to take that kind of attitude if we want to see change in the police setting, if we want to see the culture change. That's why one of the things that I love is that, Ron and myself, we've been on different panels together. I remember in Washington, D.C., when he was on the Obama campaign, when I was able to come there and speak, that he was open about what I had to say. And he didn't have the mindset to say, nope, I was in policing and I know that it goes this way. But he listened to what the audience around him was saying. And I believe from that listening that some of those things that he has done, he has implemented and has shared those ideas that many of us have spoken to him about with other police forces. And I believe it just takes one person to be able to change one person, and that one person change a person. And that's when we'll see the policing culture change, when we continue to talk about it and have these conversations, because they're so important. And I just, thank you for even, giving me the opportunity, to share and voice, my opinion and my thoughts about policing and what we could do to improve, the policing.
Thank you for that. Before we go, can you tell us about your son?
I will. I'll share one thing is years ago, that before Oscar died, I had been praying one day unto the Lord, and I believe that the Lord had showed me that my son and I would be in ministry together. Oscar was the type of young man and even boy who, I raised in church, and he loved to get in front of people and do the prayer. He loved to get in front of people and do scripture. He loved to sing. And he grew up and he made some decisions that I wasn't favorable for, but he made those decisions. But I always knew that even the bad decisions that he would make, the Bible tells you to train up a child in the way that he should grow, that when he gets old, he won't depart from it, that they would come back. And so in that, that dream and the vision that I believe I received from the Lord was that Oscar and I would be in ministry together. And when Oscar was killed, I said, well, Lord, I thought you said we would be in ministry together. And I, had this little fit with the Lord, and the Lord began to remind me to look around. And he reminded me that basically I'm here today only because me and Oscar was in ministry together. Because had not that happened with Oscar, I could possibly not be here with you on today sharing and talking about police practicing, and I probably would not have been. And so that brought me, great comfort to know that, even though Oscar's gone, he's still living. I'm still going all over the United States, because of what happened with him. And it may not have been the ministry that I thought and envisioned that it would be, but it still is a ministry, because through what happened with Oscar, I'm still able to connect with other mothers and let them know, what you're going through, God is able to get you through it. To let them know that, you may be shedding tears, but there is a purpose in whatever happened, and that purpose is for you to share with someone else so that they could be encouraged on their battle. And so I'm so, God has given me such a gratefulness now to know that, everything that Oscar went through was for a purpose. One thing that I couldn't do as his mother was to protect him from that, which I would have loved to, if I would have been there, to love to get in the way and been his shield, right? But there's a timing for everything. And because of what happened with Oscar, I believe that our society became even more aware of what has been going on, but yet we didn't know about it, right? And so because of that, I'm comforted, and I'm grateful that it opened up eyes of people to see that there's a great change that needs to occur, and there's a greater cause, and that is that we have to learn to love one another, no matter what our nationality, no matter what our differences is. And so Oscar was a young man who loved people. And even in the movie, you seen how that the dog had died. I remember when Oscar was working in Berkeley, a man came in there and he had lost his dog, and Oscar was so concerned about it, wanted to try to help him get another dog, and how even, when Oscar worked at the market and the young lady came and she didn't even know how to cook fish. So Oscar said, hold on a second. So Oscar called me and his mom, me and my mom rather. And we began to talk to her and tell her what kind of fish to buy and how to cook the fish. And so Oscar was that type of young man who would try to help you along the way, And the last story I could say about Oscar was when we lived in San Leandro, California. There was someone who lived under us. And I came home one night and his sliding door was open. And there was a cord that was plugged up to the wall. And I was like, why is this cord plugged up to the wall, right? So I unplugged the cord and shut the window. And I got a knock at the door about 15 minutes later. And I said, yes. And it was the people from downstairs. And they said, Oscar was kind of helping us. I said, helping you to do what? And they didn't have any PG&E. And so Oscar was using our PG&E with the extension cord so that they could have lights and have their refrigerator on. And so when Oscar came home, I said, why didn't you tell me that I was spending all my money while my PG&E bill was going up, and I was teasing. But that let me know that, it wasn't just about him, but it was about the people that he encountered. And my mindset now is if the foundation can just do a little portion of that, being able to help somebody along the way, then I know that Oscar's death wasn't in vain. I know that his legacy will continue to live on throughout the ages. And I know that someone will come back and be able to pay it forward and remember that, I was helped because of what happened with Oscar through the foundation. And now it's my time to help somebody else just because of that.
That is beautiful. Thank you for raising such a beautiful person. So, Ms. Wanda, tell me about the mural in the street.
So we have been meeting with the BART, trying to get a lasting memory of Oscar there. And they, in turn, agreed to put a mural up. It was completed. And so there's a picture of Oscar. Every time you go there, you'll see a picture of him along with his street name. They named a street right over by the BART station, Oscar Grant Way. And so we are grateful in that part that we was able to get a lasting memorandum of Oscar there at the BART station. We're not finished yet because we want that BART name change. And, we want them to do a couple other things at the BART station in honor of what happened with my son. But we're grateful that we got, two of the pieces of the puzzle that we wanted done, and that was the street naming and also the mural. And it's a very beautiful mural of Oscar there. Visitors, when they come and they think about Oakland, often want to go to the Fruitvale BART station and look at the mural. So we're grateful.
Wow. Thank you to both of you for standing in your truth, your experiences, your strength, to leading beyond your own set of circumstances. You've given a lot to me today, hopefully to our audience. I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening. Please check out the Minneapolis Foundation website to find more episodes of this podcast, information on upcoming events, and for my book recommendations. Thank you to Weber Shandwick for their partnership and support in making this podcast come alive.